Like literally, like if you're not cheating, you're not trying. And when I
Explain.
Yeah. And as a former powerlifter, I'm going to get a lot of backlash for this, but I don't think a lot of powerlifters are athletic. I got invited to an international level competition. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend, but I wanted to do the promoter a favor and be like, hey, I have a recommendation. And the thing that shocked me was when I referred this athlete, he was like, oh, well, you see, he doesn't really have a social media presence. There has been instances, even at big level shows, where somebody cheats and they have to sit there and talk about like, hey, but now we kind of have to allow all of the athletes to do that. I know a lot of smaller athletes who can deadlift 800-900 pound deadlifts, but can you pick up 800 pounds and walk with it?
All right. Hey, Mark, thanks for coming.
Of course, I'm happy to be here.
How did you get to where you are today?
So actually, believe it or not, I was a sprinter. I started sprinting when I was in high school, but believe it or not, that wasn't my first sport. I was a basketball player. Being as short as I am, relatively, didn't make it far in basketball. I was slowly seeing more and more bench time, and then I got introduced to track through my sister. She was a sprinter too. And so I started going to track workouts my sophomore year of high school, and I just started sprinting from there, and I loved it. I was a 100 meter, 200 meter, 4x1 and 4x200 meter sprinter. I did some long jump every now and then, but I did not take that seriously because I didn't really enjoy that. My throwing coach always wanted me to get into shot put and discus, and I also had no interest in pleasure in doing that. So I just focused on sprinting. My best time when I was a peak sprinter, I weighed 230 pounds and I had a 10.9 or a 10.6, I'm sorry, at the 100. Yeah, the 100 was my main event. I was too big to really be good at the 200. So that's kind of why I just took the 100 meter seriously. I did that pretty much up until I graduated. I also played football a little bit, but I also sucked at that because I didn't like grow up watching football. I was never really a big football fan. I was just kind of the big dude, so they threw me into football. My senior year, I ended up quitting just because I wanted to take track seriously. From there, after high school, I graduated and I joined the military, where I took running to my benefit, essentially. My best 2-mile time when I was in the military, I was still averaging about 2:30 throughout my entire career. I ran an 11:10. So not the fast, that's not bad, but for being as big as I was pretty good about that. Actually, it was a funny story where when I was in basic training, that was when I ran that 11:10. And for being as large as I was, relatively, of course, everybody thought I was cheating. So the next time we did a physical fitness test, we had to use like lap sticks. They gave us like popsicle sticks for laps. And I ended up getting second. And the only reason I got second was because the guy that got first was a cross country runner. And I used him as a rabbit the entire time. So he beat me by I think 3 to 5 seconds, something like that. But we were just neck and neck the entire time. And he vouched for me. He was like, Mark was with me the entire run. So I served in the military for a couple of years. I served as an 11 Bravo infantryman. It's funny because Colorado was actually one of my dream stations. I got lucky to come here. However, throughout my time in the military, I spent no time here. As soon as I graduated, I got to Fort Carson. I was there for about a month, went on winter block leave. Once I got back, I went off to Afghanistan for 9 months. As soon as I got back, I went on winter block leave again. When I came back, I had a couple training cycles in different states. And then around the summertime, I went off to Fort Benning to go to Ranger School. So I was, I think, 18 at the time when I went to Ranger School. I did that in the summer, and then I came back. I went to Fort Polk, Louisiana for another training cycle. I went on winter block leave, and then basically what it came down to was I was really motivated. I really loved the military. I was slotted to go to the 75th Ranger Regiment selection course called RASP. I had a packet in there for that. But about before I left for Ranger School, I met a girl who is now my wife. And so she was my girlfriend at the time. I had been kind of getting tired of being away all the time. And so I had a really cool command team. Everybody was super supportive and stuff like that. Like we were all on like a pretty personal basis, to be honest. And so he kind of came to me and he was like, "You don't seem very motivated to go to RASP anymore." And so he was like, "But you only have two options. You either go to RASP or you deploy with us again." So I deployed again. After winter block leave, I went back to Afghanistan for a second time. I was there for about 4 months and then I ETS'd from the military.
What's ETS for those who don't know military?
I don't actually remember what the acronym stands for, but something I actually don't remember.
Yeah. Just leaving or something like that.
It's getting out of the military, essentially.
Yeah.
You're just transitioning out. So I got out of the military. I got out of the military in November of 2018. And transparently, I kind of dealt with some mental issues. You know, I kind of... I guess what the kids are saying, I had a lot of FOMO. My boys, they were still in Afghanistan, stuff like that. So I kind of needed an outlet, and I was training on Fort Carson. That's where at the time I met my coach, my powerlifting coach, Joe Todd, who kind of picked me up under his wing, and we got into powerlifting. At the time, I was, I think, like 240, 250 when I got out of the Army. I started powerlifting there, and I think one day, it was funny because he'll always tell the story where he saw me in the gym in Ranger panties, little short shorts. I was wearing short shorts, and I was deadlifting all back, but I was pulling like almost 600 pounds at the time, and he was like, "Who is this guy? We need to work with him." And so he picked me up. We started working together. He became my coach. I powerlifted from 2018 to, I want to say, right after COVID. So I want to say like 2021, I was a powerlifter competitively. But even when I was in the military, I was still, you know, training my compound lifts. So I wasn't competing or anything like that, but I was still squatting, still benching, still deadlifting. So that kind of became my outlet. In my years of powerlifting, I want to say I competed about nine times, I would say. I went from my very first total at 220 pounds. I think it was like a 1600 total, something like that. And then my very last competition before getting into Strongman, it's a really big show called the Ghost Clash that happened in Miami. Really big weekend for me that I will always hold near and dear to my heart because I won the show, I won Best Lifter, and that's when me and my wife got engaged. The same weekend, not at the competition, but we were in Miami and I was feeling it, so I was like, this is going to be the time. So that's when I proposed to my wife. I weighed in at 273 and I had a 2056 total. So I had a 840 pound squat, a 420 pound bench. This is all rounded just because of the kilo the transfer, and then I think I had an 815 deadlift, something like that.
Squats harder than your deadlift?
Yeah, big squatter. I really like squatting. And what's funny is when I started powerlifting, my deadlift was way bigger than my squat. Like I was squatting super high. I barely was squatting like 450. But it was funny because Joe was my coach at the time. He was like, "No, watch, your deadlift is going to fly." Or I'm sorry, he's like, "Your squat is going to fly once we start fixing things and start working on mechanics and stuff like that." And yeah, to this day, my personal bests, I have an 881 raw squat, I have a 440 pound bench, and I have a 926 deadlift.
Sheesh. Yeah, that's a lot of weight. I'm curious because Joe told me something about you actually when he was here. Yeah, so when you hit 800 pound squat, and then when you started a training cycle and your 60% is like really, really high, right? How did you manage that? Because, you know, for context for us people, mere mortals, right? If we squat 450, something like, and our 60 pounds is over 60%, it's not that terrible, but your 60% is wild, right? Like 720. Yeah, on a working weight. I'm a working set. Like, how did it feel?
I guess it's not necessarily about how it feels. I think it comes down to, there was a point where I was like, hey, like I told my coach, like, I'm starting to kind of red line. And, you know, I was like, hey, like, I told my coach, like, I'm starting to kind of red line. And, you know, I was like, hey, like, I told my coach, like, I'm starting to kind of red line. And, you know, I was like, hey, like, I told my coach, like, I'm starting to kind of red line. And, you know, I was like, hey, like, I told my coach, like, I'm starting to kind of red line. And, you know, I was like, hey, like, I told my coach, like, I'm starting to kind of red line. And, you know, I was like, hey, like, I told my coach, like, I'm starting to kind of red line. And, you know, I was like, hey, like, I told my coach, like, I'm starting to kind of red line. And, you know, I was like, hey, like, I told my coach, like, I'm starting to kind of red line. And, you know, I was like, hey, like, I told my coach, like, I'm starting to kind of red line. And, you know, I was like, hey, like, I told my coach, like, I'm starting to kind of red line. And, you know, I was like, hey, like, I told my coach, like, I'm starting to kind of with good programming and good coaching, one of the things that we started transitioning was, instead of trying to hit those, RPEs or those certain percentages, we made lighter weights feel heavier. Whether it was things like tempo squats, or maybe it was like pause squats, or, whatever the exercise is, adding extra variables to make lighter weights seem heavier is how I would say I rebounded. Before my very first 800-pound squat, my heaviest PR and my heaviest gym squat during my peak was, I think, like 760 or 770. And then I went to the competition and ended up squatting 840. So realistically, managing fatigue, understanding time under tension, and developing that explosive power in really taking your form at a micro level and understanding where you can exert power more, right? So when you're going for that 1 rep max, understanding how you can exert power effectively versus just trying to grind something out. I think that was the biggest change in a lot of my lifts, was your body can only handle so much, right? Like for me, right, I was an 800-pound squatter, 800-pound deadlifter. If you're doing 700-pound squats, whether it's, for sets of 3 or sets, even if it's like sets of 6 or something like that, your body, regardless of how strong you are, can only take so much. So we basically would stack things to where 1 week it'd be like really heavy, and maybe it's like for a double or something like that, and then like for another week we back off and it'd be like 600, but it'd be like pause squats or box squats or like dead stop, stuff like that. So it's really about that periodization of like where you pick and pull from it, and then of course it comes with a mature athlete of understanding your fatigue levels and kind of when backing off. I, for one, am very transparent. I am super lazy in the gym. And if I'm not feeling it, I will be the first one to be like, hey, I'm going to pull back, and I try, if I do something where it's like, hey, you have an RPE 8 or like an 80% of your 1 rep max type of situation, like I'll be like, okay, let's not pull back more than maybe 10%. See how that feels. Maybe it is an off day. Because one of the big things that I would say that I've noticed from a lot of athletes that like I've been around, work with, or even hung out with, whatever it may be, they don't know the difference between genuine physical fatigue and mental fatigue. And they can affect you both the same, but in also different ways. You could get under a squat bar in something that you could hit for 6, let's say, for example, 70% of your 1 rep max. That could feel like a 1 rep max just picking it up from the rack. But that, that could be things like, did you get enough sleep last night? Did you, have enough water? How's your nutrition been? We talked about this even before the podcast started, where I'm really thankful that we're kind of in an era where nutrition and, recovery information is so accessible, because some people just don't focus on some of those things. So people want to go hit the gym and they think the gym is the hardest part. For me as a professional strongman, even though I train on average about 2.5 to 3 hours a session 4 times a week, I think the hardest part of what I do is making sure I eat, is making sure I'm having enough water, is, we talked about sleep apnea earlier, making sure I'm, throwing my CPAP mask on, or making sure I'm getting enough hours of sleep, stuff like that. And so I think that's one of the biggest things, is where if you want to set yourself apart from being, an average competitor to being an elite level competitor, it's understanding I wouldn't necessarily call them outliers, but essentially the outliers in your routine. What are things that you're not taking care of? It could even not be personal, how's your job situation? How's your finances? Are you stressed about debt or something like that? Like so many outliers can contribute to how you feel when you walk into the gym. To a certain degree, I know a lot of people can, contribute the gym to like therapy, but like if you still have things going on, you're still going to have things going on. And so I really try and balance, everything in my life, whether it's spiritual, whether it's, relationship wise, whether it's, my career, stuff like that. I try and, especially when I get really close to these big shows, I'm like, hey, like we really need to dial some of these things in. But to kind of answer your first question, to get to where you are. Yeah. So I was doing powerlifting and stuff like that. When I got out of the military, my parents actually treated me to a vacation where we went to Iceland, and I was training for IPL Worlds at the time. was still a powerlifter. And at the time I was like maybe like 5 or 6 weeks away, so I needed to train, or vacation or not, I still got to work out. And I knew of Hafthor Bjornsson at the time. I knew he was, you know, a fitness icon. I knew he had a gym in Reykjavik, Iceland. So I went out there, and he wasn't there when I showed up. I got a day pass. His father let me in. His dad kind of runs the gym, and I started my deadlift session. And right before my top set, I see this mountain of a man walk in, and I'm like, oh god, that's literally Hafthor Bjornsson right there. And so I pull my top set, and then I kind of, you know, decompress a little bit, and then we start chopping it up a little bit, and he starts talking about, you know, strongman and stuff like that. So I would say while I've always kind of been a fan of strongman, Hafthor Bjornsson is kind of the person that really kind of got me into strongman. Whether he remembers me or not, it's kind of funny, but like, yeah, we had like maybe like an hour-long conversation. He was getting ready for Ultimate Strongman Dubai or something like that, and he was like getting ready. He had just gotten married to his wife, and so we were talking about all kinds of stuff like that. And then afterwards, he was like, do you want to like pick up like Atlas stones and stuff? So him and his dad taught me how to do Atlas stones. So the very first strongman move that I ever did was an Atlas stone. It was pretty sick. And so when I got back from that trip, I kind of was like lost. I was like, how do I do more of that kind of stuff? Because I hadn't been in a gym that had equipment like that. I've never even seen some of the things I saw at Hafthor's gym. So I just I didn't even know anybody who competed in strongman. So a couple years into my strongman career, I don't even know how, or I'm sorry, into my powerlifting career, I don't even know how I saw it, but there was an advertisement for a really good show that happened up in Denver called the Sunday Paper Classic. That was the very first strongman show I've ever been to in person. It's a really good event. I was just the MC for the 4th year of Sunday Paper, so it was kind of like a full circle kind of moment. But it was the very first show. It was at a brewery up in Denver, and it's fully a fundraiser for St. Jude. So all of the profits that are made off of the show, all the admissions that are made off the show, go back into donation for the St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. And shout out to Ryan Stewart for putting that on. That's the promoter. And so Ryan put on this fantastic show. There's a stage, and they're doing like circus dumbbell overhead and stuff like that. And I was like, this sport is crazy. And so that kind of started getting me into the community a little bit. I got to meet some people who were strongman athletes there. And then at the time, it was still kind of confusing how to get into strongman. There wasn't a lot of information out there. So after, I would say about a year or two, I finally started reaching out to people, and I was like, hey, how do I do my first competition? I want to say it was 2022 or 2023, I did my very first strongman show. I signed up as a heavyweight men's open. So there's a novice category, there's an open category, there's a masters category, and then for your like local level shows like that is what you have. Sometimes there's a pro level category, and you don't have to be a pro to sign up for that category. But if you are a pro card holder, that is the only category you can sign up for. And there's, yeah, you're not allowed to do like local, you're essentially not allowed to do like local level shows. And so for me, I didn't want to do open because I was like, this is my first show, or the pro level division. So I went open. I ended up winning that show. So my very first show I did, I took a W on. There's 6 other competitors, so like I'm pretty proud about that. But I still had that powerlifting itch, I still wanted that 2,000 pound total. So I took a break from strongman. I was itching the entire time to get back to it. I ended up competing at the Ghost Clash. I got my 2,000 pound total there. And then I was kind of like, I think I'm satisfied. So then I started really training on strongman. I don't really, when I talk about how long I've been doing strongman, I don't really like count that show because it wasn't consistent. I didn't really like train super hard for it. I didn't even have like the equipment that they were using at the show, so everything was kind of just impromptu. Like I was just trying to get familiar with things. So that's kind of why I don't really contribute it as my first show, but essentially it was I want to say it was 2023, because I did a warm-up show I'm sorry, let me take a step back. So after I won that show, pretty much everybody, the promoters, the volunteers, even other athletes, they're like, you should try out for the official Strongman games. And I was like, I don't know what that is, but okay. But like I said, I still wanted to get my 2,000-pound total, so I focused on that. And then when I came back, I was like, cool, what is this official Strongman games? Everyone calls it OSG. That's just the acronym. What is this OSG that everybody keeps talking about, telling me to do? I did a warm-up show called the Celtic Bison. That was up in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I got second there in the pro category. Like I said, you don't have to be a pro to do it. Just know that you're competing against potential pros. And so there is a rule where I think weights have to be, I think like 10 or so % more than the heaviest weight category in the competition. And that's kind of what sets the difference between the two. So I got second place there, and I used that kind of as my feeder back into the community, like back into, okay, I'm training like a strongman now. I flew out to North Carolina for the official Strongman games. I can't remember what region it was, but it's a regional qualifier essentially. You don't have to have any experience. You don't need to qualify to go to a regional qualifier. You can come straight off the street. So I just signed up, flew out to North Carolina, and in that show, there are 12 people in my weight class in the men's open heavyweight, and there was 6 or 7 pro cards that I was competing against. And this is something I'm also pretty proud of. I got second at that show. Yeah, so it was pretty nuts. A lot of people, I kind of came in as the underdog because everybody that was at that competition, it's not a competition you should do as your first or second show, but it was technically like my second show or my third show ultimately. And I came in as the underdog. No one knew who I was. And then slowly as the events were going, everybody was like, who is this guy? And so that was kind of like my rise to fame moment where I was like, it was kind of funny. I was like, no, I'm strong. Like,
Yeah, do you think your powerlifting background helped you? And is that a big part of it, you think?
I think absolutely, right? There's levels when it comes to the strongman shows. Like being statically strong is really good, but it's not always static. So the events at the show was a max circus dumbbell overhead. So it's that one arm huge globe that you basically push press over your head with one arm. There was a car deadlift. I think I got second in that. We did a Ford Expedition Max. I think I got 11 or 12 reps with that. There was a sandbag loading medley with a sled drag afterwards. There was something else.
Did that gas you out?
Yeah,
How did you feel?
I was dead. Yeah. I had no conditioning. I was still kind of training like a powerlifter. We were still training, like when I trained for the show, it was basically still like hypertrophy focus, but with events. So we were just throwing events in there every now and then. Then the last event was a keg load over bar for as many reps as possible. So that's why when you ask that question about my powerlifting background, yes, I think it complements it well. But I think the biggest thing that I realized coming from powerlifting was I had no conditioning. Everything that we did, you needed like a V12 engine, but like I had like a 5-gallon gas tank. I remember finishing every event and I was like, I don't know how we have to do 4 more things. I don't know how we have to do 3 more things. And then I was like looking at some of these things. I was like, I have to pick that up and carry it. I got to drag that. I was so yes, I think it definitely benefited, but I also learned a lot about myself. I was like, okay, I am not conditioned at all.
Yeah, that said though, because I told you this earlier offline. I didn't know much about a strongman, and I saw one of your videos, and you were doing conditioning work. You were holding booty, going back and forth. It's like strongman people do conditioning too, huh? So like, what kind of conditioning do you do, and how often?
I would say it kind of depends on the actual workout. You know, like there's different variables to conditioning depending on the way that my coach programs it. Sometimes that conditioning thing is things like box jumps or, you know, like suicides or even things like, I mean, everything you kind of do in strongman has a like a contribution to conditioning, in my opinion, right? Like, so sometimes, for example, I'll do EMOMs and they'll be at like 80, 85, maybe even 90% sometimes. Sometimes I'll do like sandbag carries for sprints, you know, like, so while I don't sit there, well, I do sometimes do like sprints. I guess it really depends on what your idea of conditioning is. It's just the way that it's sometimes just the way that my exercises are programmed. Things like EMOMs or AMRAPs. I do a lot of EMOMs. I do a lot of AMRAPs. I do a lot of carries for distance. I do a lot of, plyometric work, stuff like that. So
Do you do zone too?
like where my heart rate's at.
Yeah, below 70% or something like steady.
Yes. Like I try and do like incline walks. If we were to like contribute, or if we were like to relate like strongman to like CrossFit conditioning, no, that's like a whole different realm. I would say similar in an aspect, but I would say it's maybe like a little bit more granular than like a CrossFit WOD or something like that, if that makes sense. So like, no, not necessarily like super hardcore conditioning, but every exercise that I'm programmed has an aspect of conditioning to it, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, so it's kind of like specific for your sport. So that's similar to a competition.
Right, because pretty much every event that you'll do in Strongman is timed. Whether it's a split time that's taken or you have to survive something for a certain amount of time, right? So like, that's a bad example. I was going to say something like we had like front holds and stuff like that. Like you kind of have to be conditioned to hold something for an X amount of time. But at the same time too, like I said, that was kind of a bad example. But say, for example, car deadlift. I recently competed in the Santa Monica Classic. That got me my invite to OSG this year. And we had 60 seconds to deadlift a car as many times as possible. And you can, if you have that static strength, it's going to be easy. But is it going to be easy for you that entire 60 seconds? And I think it's stuff like that where those AMRAPs, those EMOMs, to where, you learn to like pace yourself a little bit. That's where I would say a lot of my conditioning comes from. And then every now and then, like I said, like I'll do like sprints, I'll do like high volume, like assault bike, stuff like that. But yeah, I think that's like the majority of but I think that's the extent of like my conditioning, really.
Yeah. So what are other stuff that most people don't know about strongman? You think? Because that was one, conditioning. Because I thought you guys were just like pure brute strength, like powerlifting.
I would say one of the biggest things in strongman that I think is misinterpreted is you don't have to be like 6'9", you don't have to be 400 plus pounds to be a strongman, to even be a pro strongman. I actually tell this to people all the time when I'm introducing someone to strongman. Is the weight, so we call them weight class categories. The weight class so like for me, I'm not in a weight class. I'm in the super heavyweight open, which basically goes from 231 and above. Yeah. So
you're competing with 400-pound guys.
Exactly. And the thing that I always compliment is the weight class athletes are so much, to a degree, right? It depends on the show aspect, but they're so much more interesting to watch because when you talk about weight lifted compared to body weight, it's astronomical, right? So I competed in the official strongman games back in 2023. One of the events we had to do was a frame carry for 50 feet for the super heavyweight men, right? So I weighed like 320 at the time, and there were dudes who were 400 plus pounds. Our frame was 790 pounds. There were women in the, I think, like 82.5 kilo weight class who had like a 600-pound frame. So when you look at that marginally, they're doing way more times than your body weight. And I think it's so phenomenal to watch because it's just like, it's cool to see a big dude lift a big thing. But in my opinion, it's really cool to see an average sized human, relatively, do similar feats of strength. Like it's just crazy to think about because you think you're strong, but like you can be as large as you want in my weight class. There are men who weigh, I know I have a guy that I'm friends with. He weighs 100, he's in the 181 weight class in strongman, and he's got like a 220-pound circus dumbbell overhead press. So it's like, for me, I'm 330, 325-ish right now. My max circus dumbbell, relatively it sucks, but my max circus dumbbell is like 220, 240. And you have a guy who's 181 who's able to do 220, 240 like that. It's nuts. So that's why I always say the biggest myth that you'll see in strongman is you don't have to be a giant. Matter of fact, if we even come back to my weight class, there are dudes who are way bigger than me. And for, you know, for the sake of the podcast, I'm maybe on a good day 6 feet tall, 320, and I am always the smallest guy that shows up to competitions. I'm usually always the smallest guy, but I'm capable, you know, depending on the athlete. But like I have historically beat people who were 6'5", 6'8", 400 plus pounds, because to a degree, there's always been this ideology of mass moves mass, but how long can that mass move that mass for? So it really just depends.
So you said offline that nowadays, I mean, you don't have to be extremely big anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Has the sport changed, or have they found an ideal body to, I guess, the ideal body weight for your category?
I don't necessarily think there's an ideal body weight. I just think strongman is so different in terms of like events and how things work out, right? Like Hafthor Bjornsson, 6'9", 440, giant of a human, and does extremely well. He's also very athletic, very statically strong, or very well conditioned. There are people who are probably even bigger than Hafthor who couldn't do as much things as Hafthor is successful at. But also there are people who are a lot smaller than Hafthor that have also beat Hafthor at events. So I don't really think that there's a ideal body size or weight or anything like that. I think the best thing that I would say to complement that is it's whatever you feel healthiest, strongest, and most conditioned at. For me, when I first got into the sport, I was kind of under the impression mass moves mass. I got up to 347 pounds one time, and I was extremely uncomfortable. I couldn't move. I was so large that even my static lifts, my leverages had changed so much that I couldn't even do things that when I was 275 at. So I think it really comes down to the human body specifically or uniquely, like what your anatomy looks like, what your leverages look like. Has the sport changed? I think it's kind of evolved. I don't know if it's intentionally changed, but from the way I've seen it in the past to current day strongman, it has always been somewhat of the same level events. There's always usually like a pushing event or a pressing event overhead. There's usually like a pulling or like a deadlifting type of event. There's usually like a carry type of event and stuff like that. And so realistically, I think the way that promoters have been putting on shows, it's kind of evolved into a way where, yes, being large is good if you can be good at being large. So it really just depends. I mean, like I said, I'm usually the smallest person at my competitions. So that has its pros, and it also has its cons. There are people who are, you know, unfortunately just not genetically gifted in height. And, you know, we have things like loading events. You know, one of the pinnacle strongman events is like loading Atlas stones. Sometimes, depending on the show, you have loading heights that go up to like 60 inches. So if you're 5'5", 5'6", and you're in the super heavyweight category, you got to pick up like a 300-pound rock essentially and load it basically over your head. So it really just depends. I think being a powerlifter and now being a strongman, there is a degree of where you should probably be a weight that is complementary to your height. For me, I'm large, but I'm still technically relatively short, obviously, right? But like if you're, you know, 5'6" to, you know, I would say 5'5" to like 5'8", you might not want to consider being like a heavyweight strongman. And that might be something where you should take a step back and be like, I should probably lose some weight. There's different weight classes in our sport, but I would speak on the pro level. So there's at the pro level, there's essentially, we call it the open. Those are 231 and infinity. Then you have your under 231, and then you have your U90s, and then you have your U80s. So that's in kilograms, obviously, but U80, and then 80 kilo to 90 kilo, 90 kilo to 105. In the women's, I'm going to butcher this because I don't know it accurately, but it's basically open. I think it's 82, and I want to say it's either 92 or 82 and a half I think it's 73 and a half or something like that. And then I think there's a 64 or something like that. Like I said, unfortunately, I just don't know them off the top of my head. But there are at the pro level, there are weight classes. So you can also be a pro level strongman, but don't need to be massive or strong woman, depending on who you are.
I'm guessing the lower weight classes, because like there's a lot more in that pool. Do you think it's pretty competitive?
From what I've seen from my 2 years, this year will be my third, but in my 2 years of going to the official Strongman Games, that is the world show. So if you're a open category athlete, if you're an open male, that is your qualifier to go to Giants Live and World's Strongest Man. Basically, Giants Live is a heavyweight show that basically, if you podium there, you get an automatic invite to World's Strongest Man. In the weight classes in general, the official Strongman Games World Finals is that international world championship. That is where you fight for, if you're a U105, that is the U105 World's Strongest Man title. So when you talk about the actual size of these weight classes, I would say, is there more pool? Believe it or not, and I could entirely be wrong, but this is from my perspective and not with a lot of data. I still think the open men, there's a lot of us. There really is a lot of us. To kind of give you an actual factual statistic, I recently competed at the Santa Monica Classic. They did 4 weight categories. It was U90 and above 90 for the men. And then I don't remember what the weight classes were for the female, but there was obviously only 2. There are 0 signups for the heavyweight women's. There were 0. They were literally 0. So they announced that they were going to take that weight class and basically open more spots for the other categories, and they still filled up. And then actually at the show, I think there were like 5 lightweight women, I think, in total. And then there were like 20 lightweight men. And then I think there was 12 or I want to say 15. I'm more confident about 15 of the heavyweight men. So realistically, I want to sit here and say that there's probably a bigger pool, but I don't know. I think when I say that, it comes from a perspective of doing slightly larger shows. I want to say at the local level, like the state level, your local level competitions, that probably is the case, where like your lighter weight classes are larger. It's just transparently and humbly, I just haven't done a local show in a really long time. So I'm pulling data from the shows that I've done recently. Right now, the roster is public for the official Strongman Games, and I think there's like 30 open weight men or super heavyweight men. And per like the lighter weight classes, the lightweight men's get pretty big, but like women, for example, and I really would like to see a lot more women in the sport of strongman, because it's so much fun watching them compete. But like, I have a friend who's going to the official Strongman Games, and her weight class has 11 athletes. So
what is this? What do you mind telling me what her weight class is?
I think it's 161. I don't know what that is in kilos off the top of my head, but I think it's the 161. So it really just depends. And it, again, like I said, that's personal. That's my perspective on that data. But like I said, I could be completely wrong. And at the local level, it's probably more spread out. But I have seen, like I said, in the past, statistically, we've literally closed out a weight class because it didn't fill up.
It's too many.
It's too many.
Yeah.
I guess I can actually even speak about the Beast of the Peak. So
yeah.
I recently hosted my very first show. It was a novice level show. The reason I put it on was because as I've kind of gotten a little bit higher, I've noticed that there's kind of a weird gap of there's not really a next generation to start filling into the sport. And so I wanted to have a low overhead, low commitment type of competition where you can get introduced to the sport of strongman without having to sign up for a federation and paying all of those fees and stuff like that. And so it sold out multiple times being that there was a 40 athlete cap. We hit 40, I think 2 months into opening the registration. And then literally anytime somebody dropped, it was never more than a day somebody signed up. To put it into perspective, we had 20 lightweight men, we had 6 heavyweight men, we had 5 lightweight women. My numbers aren't going to add up to 40, I'm sorry, but about. We had, and then about, I want to say about 5 or 6 of the heavyweight women and lightweight women.
That's a lot of people. That's pretty good.
Yeah, it was a huge success. We had a little over 100 spectators. We had about 15, 17 or so volunteers. And it was a really good turnout. I was really happy about that because I was stressing out. I had really big extremes of that stress of nobody's gonna show up and we're gonna have not enough space. Cause it was just basically like bipolar. I was like, we're not gonna have enough room. We're not gonna have any spectators. But it ended up being a phenomenal event. So many people were telling me how much they enjoyed the community. That was the biggest thing, was everybody was like, wow, like people were so supportive. And I had I had people sign up from the show from, not in, this isn't in a derogatory way, but like I had people sign up who were like house moms all the way up to like CrossFitters, people who, just regular gym goers, etc. So it was a very diverse crowd, and everybody's like, this community is like unmatched.
Yeah, let's go on a tangent because there's something that you mentioned something about the low hanging fruit. Is strongman similar to weightlifting or powerlifting? Because when I competed in powerlifting and weightlifting as a CrossFitter, I had to sign up for the federation. I had to sign up for the competition itself, buy $100 singlet. So right off the bat, you're looking at $300, $450 for just one event. Is it like that with strongman?
Are you talking more so like the actual structure of the show or the actual back end logistics of it, like getting into the sport, getting into a competition?
Getting into a competition.
Okay, so let's just say for example, traditionally, if you want to get into the sport, I really would advise athletes don't buy equipment unless you know you need it or even know what you're doing with it. So like if you have never trained with a belt before, this probably isn't the time to just buy a belt, right? You don't need to do that. If you've got the liquid to do that, by all means, send it. Have fun with your money. But traditionally what you'll do is, one, you need to find a show. There are, in my opinion, not enough show promoters. There are way too many athletes, not in a bad way, but like there's just not a lot of shows. We kind of, in Colorado specifically, we kind of had a weird bubble where there was like a show almost every month. And now we're kind of, we're all a little bit more collaborative as a community. Now we're like, okay, let's spread things out, but you got to find a show. Right now, your best chances of finding a strongman show is on a website called Iron Podium. Iron Podium is basically a repository that basically has strongman shows that are published. They have to obviously be published on Iron Podium, but that is where everybody posts their show. So if it's not posted on Iron Podium, it might be like a small level show or a local level show. That's totally fine too. But Iron Podium will be like your single source of truth of where shows in your area are. You can filter it by your zip code, your state, whatever you want to do. So keep in mind, if you're trying to get into the sport of strongman, you might have to travel. And that could be an hour or two, or that could be across states. It just really depends on where you're located. For me, my very first show was in Denver, and I live here in the Springs. Not that bad of a travel. My second show was in Cheyenne, Wyoming. That's about 2.5 or so hours away. I've gone all the way to North Carolina for a competition. I've gone to West Virginia for a competition, and I most recently competed in California. So it really just depends. The more enticing a show is to you, the more likely you might have to travel. Like the bigger level shows, right? Like America's Strongest Master, which is like our 40 plus year old athletes. That's actually happening this weekend, and that's in Las Vegas. The World Deadlift Championship, for example, is happening. That's a Giants live sanctioned show. That's essentially for the pro level guys. That's happening right now this weekend in the UK. So it really just depends. I got invited to a show through the Strongman Champions League. That was in Italy. And so it really just depends. But to kind of take a step back, you want to get into the sport of strongman, Iron Podium is a really good place to start, and that's where you can find a local level show. Now, it is pretty similar to powerlifting, and I'm not super versed in weightlifting federations, but it is essentially like that. So you'll hear sanctioned level shows and unsanctioned shows. Unsanctioned shows, there's no federation involved, stuff like that. So usually the reason why I went with hosting my show unsanctioned is to try and drive more athletes, newer athletes. That was my target audience, was newer athletes. The reasoning behind that was when you get into a federation, you have to start buying, memberships and stuff like that. And then on top of that, also pay registration fees. So that's what I meant by I wanted it low overhead, I didn't want people to spend a bunch of money to do this competition. To kind of pat myself on the back, I did have athletes come from Canada. I had an athlete come from Utah, Oklahoma, Wyoming, Denver. So while the goal was to have little overhead for the athletes, a lot of people ended up traveling for the show. So there was that. So you're going to have a federation. You have in the US, I'm unfamiliar with others, but your two biggest federations will be US Strongman or United States Strongman. That is a bit of a newer federation. They're not really in a building phase, but they're kind of in that mid-level building phase. And then you have a federation that's been around since 1997. That's Strongman Corp. Strongman Corp, in my opinion, this isn't to be like slanderous to US Strongman or anything like that, but Strongman Corp has just been around a bit longer and they have bigger level shows. So essentially, you sign up for one of these federations, you buy essentially an annual, or depending on what their options are, I think Strongman Corp even has a 3-year membership option. You sign up for that. You don't have to sign up for the federation until at least the day before the show. So you can kind of wait. You don't have to buy it right away. You can sign up for the show, pay the registration fee, and then say, for example, if you're like 4 months out, then the day before the competition is when you'd sign up for that federation. So you'd sign up, basically do your sanctioned show. That kind of answers your question. To take a step further, if you do well enough in that show, basically depending on the federation, Strongman Corp, if you, depending on how many athletes are in your division, first, second, third, depending on how many athletes are in your division, first, second, and third will usually get an invite to nationals. In US Strongman, I think regardless of athlete count, first, second, third always get an invite to nationals. If you do well enough, I don't know. I won't speak anymore on US Strongman just because I'm unfamiliar with the process. But in Strongman Corp, if you do top 3 and I think well enough, top 10, they get an invite to the World Championship that is hosted at the Arnold Fitness Expo in Ohio. So you get to compete in front of the entire expo. And I did that this year where I did the Arnold World Championship. I got 7th overall. And that was... It was kind of a mess, but looking at the bright side of things, it was so much fun being able to compete. While it was not necessarily an organic crowd, it was nice to be able to compete in a crowd that they didn't have to pay to come watch you. They're just kind of interested in what you're doing. The reason why I say that is I recently did the Santa Monica Classic, and that was a strongman show on the Santa Monica Pier, like right in the parking lot, right in front of the roller coaster and all the the regular amusement stuff. That was a totally free for spectator event, and that was by far probably the largest crowd I got to perform in front of. And the thing that I liked about that the most was it was so organically grown. People were just, I'm going to Santa Monica Pier today. Oh, there's a strongman event. What is this? And they're cheering you on. I represented the Philippines, and I got stopped so many times. Like I couldn't even sit down after events, and I'm not complaining about this. I loved it. But people were like sending their kids to go take pictures with me, and people were like, "Oh, you're Filipino, this and that." Like it wasn't just, "Oh, I'm a strongman fan." I was just walking by. I saw you flying a Filipino flag and I wanted to see what was going on. And then I saw you deadlift a car.
Yeah. To guys listening, I mean, Filipinos aren't known for being big. You're probably the biggest Filipino
I get that
and
all
the
the time.
strongest Filipino I've ever met. So,
Yes, I get that all the time. While I've not been officially able to make it, I have been invited to like the Philippine Strongest Man. I don't know if I'd morally compete in the competition, but I do a lot with the Philippine Strongman community to try and, promote the show, promote their events. I help mentor a lot of their local athletes in the Philippines and stuff like that. But yes, you are completely right. Everywhere I go, it is a shock when people find out I'm Filipino. I am usually just like you said, I am usually the largest Filipino these people have ever seen. And it's funny because I am the smallest person when I compete. But yeah, so there are those onesies and twosies out there. Me personally, I am also the largest Filipino I've personally ever met.
So that being said, let's talk about training, and this relates to that. How do you train? One of our good friends, Liam, you said he got big too fast, but how do you keep that weight proportional to your strength as you develop?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't really say that I'm an expert on, training and stuff. Well, not necessarily training, but like the actual science of like hypertrophy and stuff like that, right? I wouldn't say I'm like a super knowledgeable person. So if you're listening to this, take this kind of with a grain of salt that I'm trying my hardest here. But basically, I think if we're not going to get super into the weeds and details, I think there's a patience that needs to be developed, right? Like you can't get strong overnight. Even though I got my pro card proudly, my third or fourth strongman show ever, even though, I've only been a competitor in strongman for a couple years, there's still 12 plus years of a training leading up to this. Like I said from the beginning, I had a track background. Even though, I hate to be the guy that, I did this in high school, I still sprint, regularly. I still sprinted when I was in the military, and I still did sprints when I was when I was a powerlifter. Those are things that you can kind of, carry as luggage with you as you develop your strength career. There's a lot of different variables when it comes to training certain things, whether it's strength, whether it's conditioning, whether it's plyometrics, like how athletic you truly are. I think you can get strong and not be athletic. You can be very athletic and not very strong. Those are not things that are hand in hand. And so those are things that it's just this endless life cycle, right? I mean, that's why we all choose the gym. It's not going to be, you go to the gym one day and you're jacked. It is a slow burn. It's something that you kind of have to, endure the endurance on. You have to be able to persevere. While I have, 12 plus years of a training platform, it's not something that happened overnight, and it's not something that's easy either. Sometimes life gets in the way, job gets in the way, and stuff like that, and so you have to learn to balance some of those things. And then once you balance those things, the training is the easy part. I don't remember if it was on the podcast or if we were talking about this before offline, but like I said, I'm genuinely pretty lazy when it comes to the gym. The only times that I'm really locked in are like when I get really close to competitions, and that's when I really am like super hyper focused on my training. For me, I have a 4-day training week. I traditionally will try and rest on Wednesday and then rest on either Friday or Saturday, and then Sunday, depending on what I feel like training. Sometimes, depending on my session, that's why I'll usually skip like a Friday and train on a Saturday and stuff like that, just because I still need to prioritize recovery. So usually my first day of the week, I try and break things up. And so we kind of talked about it a little bit later, where like maybe one week, I'll have something super heavy, and then it'll kind of scale down from there. And then my next week, it'll be super light and it'll scale up, or it'll be like a little bit of a mixed match. So like I'm not lifting heavy every single day, every single week. But kind of like what we talked about earlier, where even though it's not heavy on paper, we do things to make lighter weights feel heavier, whether it's adding chains, adding bands, doing pauses for movements, adding like a box to some things, stuff like that. So basically, to get back into my split, I'll do like a lower body focused day, my very first training day. That's usually like a squat. I know a lot of strongmen don't squat. I rotate my squats, whether it's front squat, back squat, an SSB, another variation of a front squat, stuff like that. It's usually leg focused. And then I have accessories to that. So basically I'll have my top compound lifts. I'll usually have something that's really close to that where it accessorizes that compound lift. And then I have isolateral like accessories afterwards, whether it's like lunges or box step ups or like broad jumps or something like that, or maybe it's something like hamstring curls, stuff like that. Like your
broad jumps.
Yeah, I do those. so sometimes it's like, sometimes it's plyometric, sometimes it's, sometimes it is strength related, like bodybuilder type accessories. So that's my day one usually. My day two is usually either upper body specific or it's upper body accessory. It kind of just varies. So depending on like if I'm in prep or if I'm in kind of an off season or so, not necessarily an off season, but like not really training for a competition, it'll be like usually an overhead type of pressing movement, a pushing like a bench press type of movement, and then accessories to kind of do that, kind of like what I was talking about. Wednesday is usually my rest day, kind of usually because, after 2 days of high intensity training, that Wednesday kind of gives me that reset. Thursday, lately it's been rough, but Thursdays are usually my deadlift days. Recently we've been trying to pull 1,000 pounds. I've slowly declined or stepped away from that just because it kind of offers me a little bit no benefit right now hitting a gym PR. We were originally trying to get an invite to the deadlift world championship as a wildcard invite, but we got way too close to the wire, and it's happening this weekend and I'm not there. So that didn't happen. So we were trying to pull 1,000 pounds there. I'm scaling back, but essentially Thursday is my deadlift day. Same thing as my rest of my workouts. Usually it's a deadlift, specifically focusing on deadlift, but it could be something like block pulls. Essentially it could be something like the word completely just blanked out to me, but like say for example if you like stand on a block and pull, what's that called?
Stand on a block and pull a deficit.
A deficit. Sorry, I completely forgot the word. But yeah, like maybe it's like a deficit deadlift, maybe it's like a weird deadlift where the bar is like 10 feet long, like sometimes stuff like that. So essentially it's a deadlift, it's a top deadlift set. Then I'll usually have some like back down sets of deadlift and then accessories to complement that. In the strongman community, what you'll see pretty commonly is what we have as Strongman Saturdays. Usually the last training day of the week is usually pretty event focused. This is more so common for athletes who are like in prep getting ready for competitions. So like today, for example, that's what I was doing before I came here, was our Strongman Saturday. I had a log clean and press overhead. I had 3 sets of 3. But it wasn't heavy. It was, I think, like 70% of my 1 rep max. But to make things lighter, feel heavier, we were doing tempo. So tempo and pause. So basically on the, what is this? On the downward motion, is that the eccentric or the concentric? Yeah, so on the eccentric motion, it was a 3-second tempo with a 2-second pause at the dip and then a full repetition afterwards. So making lighter things feel heavier. After that, I had a sandbag loading medley where basically I was carrying sandbags, loading them over a bar, and then I had a frame carry. So it varies. Some athletes, if they're not like training for a competition, their last training cycle is usually like maybe another upper body accessory day, or maybe it's that day for them to work on like weaknesses, right? Like maybe it's another leg focus day, maybe it's an upper body focus day. In strongman, most of the time, a lot of athletes, whilst even if they're sensational overhead lifters or pressers, usually that's that second day of the week. It's easier to recover from. Like you can't. I don't really think it's beneficial to train things like legs twice a week if you're training at this style. I don't think it's beneficial to deadlift twice a week. I really don't think it's beneficial for anyone to deadlift more than once a week. Yep. So usually at the end of the week, basically if athletes like are in prep, they're training events towards the end of the week. If not, they're working on like weaknesses and stuff like that.
In CrossFit, during the off season, we work on weaknesses. Is it similar to you guys for off season or in season, where you off season you work on weaknesses and then in season you just go for it?
So it's a little bit different for every athlete, because I would definitely say there's a strongman season, but truthfully, there's competitions year round. So it really just depends. And so like for me, I would call my off season the majority of the months where I'm not competing. So like for me this year, that was between, I want to say, I didn't really have an off season, to be honest. But like, yeah, for me, anything longer than 3 months where I'm not in prep, is what I'd consider an off season. Realistically, personally, I wouldn't even call that an off season, just because I don't really think that's a true time off. For me, the biggest amount of shows I do are between middle to end of summer to early end of winter. So that's usually where the bulk of my shows are. So earlier in the year, that's usually what I consider my off season. The only reason why I would say that I didn't have an off season this year is because the show that I did, the Santa Monica Classic, that like flew up on the radar last minute. So my last show of my season was the Arnold World Champ or the Strongman World Championship at the Arnold. That happened back in like May or March or something. I think March. That was supposed to be the end of my season, and I was going to train up for my official Strongman Games qualifier. But being from Los Angeles, being that the show was on the pier, I could not pass that opportunity up. So I was like, yep, I'm going to do that competition. So it was a little bit of an outlier, but that's basically how my season looked. And it kind of, like I said, to answer your question, it kind of just varies, right? Like there are unfortunately athletes who like don't think they have weaknesses. So even though an athlete might say, I'm entering an off season, it doesn't necessarily mean they're changing their training cycle or their training style particularly. I know athletes who aren't even getting ready for a competition but still train specific events. And it's kind of funny because while there's still benefit to it, if you don't really know what events you're doing at your competition, you might be, not necessarily like slowing yourself down, but essentially kind of holding yourself back a little bit, right? Like, say, for example, there's always going to be foundational events. There's always going to be some form of an overhead press. There's always going to be some form of a deadlift or a pulling event, a carrying event, and a loading event. So it really just depends. So even if you're training events and you're in an off season, as long as you're kind of hitting those bases, whatever your weaknesses may be, I think that's how hopefully a smart athlete's kind of handling that off season.
So if you're let's talk about periodizing and then, so let's say when you're training for a competition, how does the start of the training look like compared to when you're getting close to the competition? Is it kind of like powerlifting where you got the volumes high, light load, and then it flip flops towards the end? Or is it because you guys are different? I mean, your events are. It's kind of like CrossFit, right? It's not clean, quote unquote clean.
Yeah. It kind of depends, right? I think it comes down to having a good coach, a coach that understands your capabilities and kind of where you are as an athlete. So I think it really comes down to that. Like for me, I am currently preparing for the official Strongman Games that's happening in November. So we're like, about 12 or so weeks away. Today, I had a competition drill, and we're 12 weeks out. We were at 100% competition weight, doing it to competition standards. Do I do that regularly? No, but stuff like that. And so it's really about how well I feel like an athlete communicates with their coach, talks about things like their concerns, right? So like two of the events of the show, I have two genuine concerns. My circus dumbbell, that's one of the events, and then two, my frame carry. Those are two events that I have genuine concerns about. And so we are focusing on them early, and we are still kind of building up to that peak essentially, right? Like I wouldn't say I'm hitting my peak yet, but we are still, even though we're hitting competition weights, one thing that I will say in Strongman that might be a bit different from powerlifting, that I think should be different from powerlifting. Well, it's really hard to articulate this because in powerlifting, you're shooting for 1 rep maxes, and those shouldn't happen in the gym. In Strongman, to be competitive, you should be very, very much so stronger than the weights prescribed. So, right. So like when you're a powerlifter, you're working towards your peak and you're hitting that 95 or so percent up to your 1 rep max, and then hopefully PRing after, recovery and stuff like that leading up to your powerlifting competition. In Strongman, if your peak or your PR is the prescribed weight of the competition, your odds of doing really well at that show are pretty low. And I learned that, and that's why I always tell athletes too, like if you want to get into strongman, don't wait for shows with events that you like, or don't wait for shows that, oh, like I'm really good at these events, so I'll do this show versus another. Take like a year and compete as many times as you physically and financially can. And make sure you're coming into these shows with the intent to learn. There's so much in our sport that is just different. I have yet to do a show that had the same exact events as another show that I've done in the past. Maybe the same event, so to say, but not necessarily the same events show to show. And what I mean by that is there's always something to learn. Right now, there's like 30 or so athletes signed up for the official Strongman Games in November. And whether, while I'm coming in with the mindset to win, I also always will come in the mindset that I can learn something from these 30 other people, even other people in other weight classes. There's always something to learn. There's a funny joke in the Strongman community where, like, literally, like, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. And what I
Explain.
mean, yeah. So, and essentially what I mean by that is like learning the tips and tricks of ways that other people do things. Because in strongman, there is a very small level of like baseline rules, but every show's rules are different.
So you're finding exploits.
Exactly. And so in strongman, say for example, if we have an Atlas stone loading event, sometimes show promoters will be like, you can't use tacky, which is like a prime thing that you would use for loading Atlas stones. Sometimes they're like chalk only. They want to make it harder, or gym owners just don't like tacky. That stuff gets everywhere. So sometimes they'll be like, oh, chalk. And some people will say, oh, well, it doesn't say in the rules I can use like batter's tack or sticky adhesive with, like baseball gloves and stuff like that. They make tacky towels that are like just sticky enough to where it doesn't make a mess, but the entire towel is just covered in tacky. Some people will use stuff like that. In strongman, we can use straps for deadlifts. One of the cheating things that is slowly getting ruled out is sometimes people will have these huge straps that basically when they hold on to the deadlift bar, the bar is it's being carried obviously by their wrist and the strap, but they're holding onto the bar with the fingertips, or like the tips of their fingers, and like not even their thumb can't even reach the deadlift bar. And you're starting at a higher pick height, which is for some athletes easier. Consider cheating. So now, like, you kind of, when you go into a strongman show, the first thing that happens after registration is a rules meeting. That is your time to either strategically ask questions or strategically not ask questions. And if it's not in the rules, it's fair game. So that's where I mean by like, it kind of just depends. So like, there's just so many different variables to things.
That's actually like, no, that's pretty cool because there's a lot of mind games going on.
There's a lot of strategy in strongman.
That makes it fun. That makes it fun. Because like when I did, I think it was weightlifting. I thought it was just like lift heavy, but like at the back there's like battles going on, looking at each other's weights. Like, how do I one up this? Like you're fighting for that 1 kilo, or 2 kilos. It can get pretty fun. So
strongman is not just about being the strongest. It's about being strong enough but smart. We use a point system. And so say, for example, in a competition, if there's 10 athletes in your class, that means there's 10 points up for grabs. So if you get first place in an event in the show, you get 10 points. And then it goes down from there. So second place would get 9, third place would get 8, etc. It would move down from there. And so there's a really good example of Martins Licis where he's 2019's World's Strongest Man. I can't remember exactly what show. I think it was the Rogue Invitational, but he won the show and didn't win a single event.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
There's a very big strategy behind things, is understanding where you are in points. I would always say, though, I want to cut myself off and say, my biggest thing about competing in strongman is make sure you're still having fun. We don't get, the vast majority of us don't get paid to do this. So many of us are cash negative in the sport, whether it's travel, registration, lodging, stuff like that. Make sure the money you're spending to do these competitions, you're still having fun. But at the end of the day, when you're having fun, now you can think of things like, how many points do I need? You know, say for example, if you and I are doing a competition and I'm way better than you at log, but you've got me beat in deadlift, all you got to do is win the events that you're good at and essentially just do well enough in the events that you're not good at, and you could end up on that podium. So it really just depends. So there's a lot of strategy and a lot of, like you're saying, thinking in the sense of, how can I make this harder or easier, essentially, right? Like, say, for example, farmer carries. This would never happen. This would never happen. But think about a farmer carry event where, say, for example, it's like max distance or something like that. It would never happen because we've definitely gone to a place where we've outruled this, but maybe your grip sucks and it's not written in the rules that you can wear straps. And everybody's going to be like, oh, I'm not going to wear straps for this. And you're the one guy who read the rules. Nobody asked the question during the rules meeting, I'm going to wear straps. You know what I mean? Sometimes, for example, sometimes there's examples where loading a sandbag, you know, sometimes shouldering a sandbag is a lot easier to carry than front carrying a sandbag. If there's no rules about front carrying a sandbag, then throw that thing on your shoulder and take a sprint. You know, like for me, I had a sandbag loading event at the Beast of the Peak. Yeah, that was that novice show I was talking about earlier. And I wanted to make sure that I eliminate as many cheating variables as possible. And I was like, okay, I specifically wrote in the rules, no dragging or rolling the sandbag. Because what if you can't pick it up? So you see an athlete just sitting there like tossing the sandbag on the floor because, hey, in the rules, it didn't say you could drag or flip or roll the sandbag. You have to, I wrote explicitly in the rules, you have to pick the sandbag up and either front carry or shoulder the sandbag to the actual loading.
Man, I feel like you got to have a lawyer to like look that up and make sure it's like bulletproof, you know?
Yeah. And there has been instances even at big level shows where somebody cheats and they have to sit there and talk about like, hey, maybe after the show we have to change it, but now we kind of have to allow all of the athletes to do that. I forgot where it was, but there is a show where there was an Atlas stone. I think it was a carry or a load, and somebody couldn't pick it up with just tacky or their hands, and they use like a figure 8 strap to wedge underneath the Atlas stone, and they use that as a grip to pick up the stone. Like
yeah, because the strap is allowed.
Yes, because the strap wasn't written on the rules. And so now they're like, crap, we didn't think about this. So now we have to essentially let the other athletes do it, but we should make sure that's a mental note moving forward that we don't allow people to wear straps, right? Like there's sometimes where promoters would prefer raw deadlifting versus wearing like deadlift suits. So sometimes that's explicitly written in the rules. Sometimes it's allowed. So it really just depends.
Yeah, those suits can like give you a lot of advantage too, like crazy advantage.
Yeah, as we've been training for my 1,000-pound deadlift, I've learned recently, as in yesterday, that I've relied way too heavily on my suit recently. Coming from a powerlifting background, I've been super confident in my deadlift ability, whether it's strapless, raw, because I was a raw powerlifter. We've been trying to pull for this deadlift, and I don't know what it has been recently, but whenever I get into the 700 range, like things start feeling unsecure, unstrong. Yeah. And I'm like, oh. And then, my last deadlift that I did in a suit was 926. When I got up to 705, I was like, I don't know if I have this today. And then I threw on that suit and it was like, Clark Kent. I was like, threw that suit out and it just flew up. And I was like, okay. So depending on your leverages, depending on the material and stuff like that, yeah, deadlift suits can have a tremendous advantage. Sometimes it can be a detriment.
Yeah, you said right now there's really no point in training to 1,000 pounds or trying to get that 1,000 pounds. Is it because kind of like what you said earlier, you're better off being good at capacity for higher-ish volume?
No.
Or no?
Well, I laugh because it was more of a personal, touchy subject, but essentially, Giants Live is the way to World's Strongest Man. the only way to get to Giants Live is either winning or podiuming top 3 at the official Strongman games, or just getting a genuine invite, maybe because, you know, crowd favorite, whatever it may be. So it is a really hard way to get in. You essentially have to be one of the strongest athletes in the world. Every year they have the deadlift world championship, which is, like I said, happening literally this weekend. And shout out to Hafthor Bjornsson for pulling the world record of 510 kilos. He just broke that world record. That happened like an hour ago. So I was watching that before I left. And so on a personal subject, me and my coach were really fighting for that because we were fighting for that wild card invite. And so while it's not ideal, 1,000-pound deadlift is 1,000-pound deadlift at the end of the day. Whether you count it in the gym, in a competition, whatever, that's still 1,000-pound deadlift. I would still prefer to do it in a competition. However, the odds just weren't in my favor. There's no competitions within that time period of when I was training for it to do a max deadlift. And so I won't get into a lot of details, but literally like 3 or 4 weeks ago, an athlete in Mexico had pulled 1,000 pounds in a competition, and so he got that wild card invite. Giants Live and World's Strongest Man they are really trying to harp on diversity, in the sense that historically it's usually been a bunch of people from Europe and a bunch of people from USA. And so they do politically really like the diversity and stuff like that. And so, like, for me, I had really high odds because I am the first person in the world to represent the Philippines at an international level for Strongman. So last year was the first year I got involved with the Strongman Philippines community, and I started reaching out to a lot of the board there and started trying to get involved. So like I know a lot of the athletes over in Strongman Philippines that compete there. So I became the first athlete in the world to represent the Philippines at an international level stage. And so the promoters of Giants Live and World's Strongest Man, they know who I am, but you still to a degree have to do well enough. And so, like I said, politically, I was trying to, I wanted to be the first 1,000-pound Filipino deadlifter. I wanted to pull 1,000 pounds and then be the very first person to wave the Philippines flag at Giants Live and World's Strongest Man. Currently, with the path we're on, it's looking very positive, and so I am on the trajectory to be the very first Filipino at World's Strongest Man.
Heck yeah.
That is the goal.
Let's go.
And I will be one of 2 people in all of Colorado to ever step on that stage, as far as I know.
Yeah.
Okay. Brian Shaw.
Yeah. He's close by. Yeah, he's close by.
He's up in Fort Lupton, I think.
Fort Lupton. Yeah.
Loveland area.
Yeah.
So he obviously went to World's Strongest Man like 20 times, but yeah, I would be one of 2 people to go to World's Strongest Man from Colorado. That is the goal. And that's not me shooting for the stars. Like I also had to believe in myself. Like that is something that is kind of coming to fruition, which I'm super excited about, because there was a really big time where like I didn't believe in myself. Like I did not think that was gonna happen, not be feasible. And it was one of those things where like, are the odds in my favor? I had a bunch of people who work with Giants Live, and they're kind of like, hey, your name's been floating around in the office, by the way, like the directors of Giants Live like know who you are, they've been talking about you, etc. And that was kind of that situation where I was like, oh, I need to kind of accept this reality, because this is something that was a dream and is finally coming to fruition. You ever have one of those moments where like you've dreamed about something and it's slowly coming true, and you're like, oh, you don't even believe it yourself? And that is one of those things that have kind of happened to me.
Do you think it's because of the small wins or even the big wins that's what gave you confidence?
I would say, funny enough, I'm not trying to say like I have low self-esteem or whatever, but it's like even my big wins, even my little wins, I would say I'm hard on myself to a degree where like I don't even celebrate those. And so when I won the Santa Monica Classic recently this year, that was kind of like my eye-opening experience of like, I had that organic crowd. I was flying the Philippines flag. You know, people had been reaching out, extending me invites to international competitions and stuff like that. And so that was kind of like my coming to God moment, essentially, where I was like, oh, like this is becoming a reality. Like I don't need to doubt myself because it is coming true.
Yeah, something similar to that. I had an Olympian here actually last week, Kate Sanderson. She said like even with the big wins or the small wins, she has like this framework called a short-term memory that like even if it's a massive win, it's like all right, go back, that move on, go back to training. If it's a bad competition, go back to training. It's always like that training. It's like celebrate for a little bit and then focus to the next one. Yeah, so.
I don't think that's healthy.
You don't think it's healthy?
I think people should learn to celebrate their victories and really be proud of them.
Yeah.
And that is something that I've had to slowly learn.
Yeah. Okay.
It's funny because so one of my training partners here in Colorado recently won World's Strongest Firefighter this year. He's got a picture with like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he like gave him like a custom made fire axe and everything. His name was Frank Boniello, and we always go back and forth. I'm like, that's the World's Strongest Firefighter right there, and he's like, that's the Santa Monica champion over there, and so on. We always do that with each other, but it's one of those things where it's like, I more so say it to my buddy Frank, but it's just like, hey, that is a huge accolade. And I think that is something that you should be proud of, that you should actually genuinely, while we mess around and joke about it, right? Like, I don't think either of us are egocentric in that way, but like, you should be proud of that. And not necessarily manipulate it, but like use it to your advantage. Like, you know, use it as a marketing strategy. Because if you want to be a pro level strongman, there is marketing. You have to sell yourself to a degree. There's a certain situation that I ran into where I got invited to an international level competition. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend, but I wanted to do the promoter a favor and be like, hey, I have a recommendation. And the thing that shocked me was when I referred this athlete, he was like, oh, well, you see, he doesn't really have a social media presence.
Oh, interesting.
There is, at the pro level, there is a marketing aspect to being at this level. I would say 80% of us have YouTube channels. Pretty much all of us are on Instagram trying to post content. Some of us have like things like TikTok and stuff like that. So like, there's a marketing aspect. This sport doesn't exist without the fans. And the sport doesn't exist with things like sponsorships and marketing deals and stuff like that. That show that I got invited to was fully paid for. Travel, lodging, food, all that was fully paid for. And the only reason that would even exist is because the show had so many sponsors. And so part of the deal of doing the show was showing up for the media day and doing things like interviews and content and stuff like that. And so at this level, there is a degree where it's not entirely just about being the strongman anymore. You still have to market yourself.
Yeah, it's a professional sport, right? Yeah, bring in the fans.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly, because without the fans, our sport is essentially picking up rocks.
If you put it that way.
Yeah. If you really think about it, our sport is just picking up rocks and picking up logs.
That's funny.
But that is the realistic thing. Like you have to kind of step back and think about that. Is like without people wanting to watch our sport, which is why you have to give back to the fans. I love everybody that like DMs me and is like supportive and, you know, likes all of my content and stuff like that, because like if people didn't care about what I do, and why am I wasting my time watching this? You know, for all of you viewers who are listening to this podcast, even if I don't know who you are, even if you didn't know who I was before this podcast, it's one of those things where like, hey, you're still supporting it to a degree and it keeps us alive. Not obviously like physically alive, but like it keeps what we do alive. You know, people cringe about like content creators, you know, sometimes to a degree, like people like cringe about that stuff, but like, hey, like to a degree, you liking or even disliking what they do still keeps them generating.
It gets engagement.
Yes,
dislikes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so like some of the people who've gone most viral were usually from hate.
Yeah. That's why, like, I actually felt like when I started, I felt like an imposter because like it felt cringy. I mean, when I'm watching someone who's new, I know how it feels, right? But like, you just got to get through that hump because that's really what's needed in this day and age, you know?
Yeah. And so like to be even transparent with like the community and like stuff like that, like we know these are things that we kind of have to do. And so like, don't get caught up with the athletes that you see on social media. I joke with, so I have friends who are sponsored by big supplement companies, big, fitness companies, and I always see some of their content and I'm like, that's not really you. But it's one of those things where like, a lot of people enjoy it. I enjoy making content and stuff like that. I enjoy making YouTube videos. I enjoy sharing my knowledge of strongman. But also it's nice to build that fan base, right? Because I can't just do 1,000-pound deadlift in the gym and all of a sudden have 1 million fans because I did that locally. So when you produce content like that, it's something where, I can make connections with people. And so that's one of the, I think, while we kind of have to do it for whether it's like a sponsorship deal or whatever it may be, it's one of those things where you can still connect with people. I can still keep the sport of strongman alive because I'm scrolling through Instagram. Why did this person pick up 1,000 pounds? What's the point of that? Then you start looking more like, oh, he's a pro strongman. Oh, that guy's Filipino. Oh, he does this. He's an Army veteran. I can connect with these people, and then you start generating that community essentially, and it's what kind of ultimately keeps what you are passionate about alive. And if there's no fans, yeah, why is that guy picking up rocks?
Yeah, because like you look at boxing,
it's entertainment.
It's entertainment. Yeah,
It's 100% entertainment.
There's like sports aspect to it, but it's both sports and entertainment.
Yeah, you are an athlete, but you're an athlete for entertainment, right? Like if nobody, I'm sure there are people who would still play football if there were zero fans, right? It's a fun sport. I would still be competing in strongman if there was zero fans. But how long I would do that for, how long, you can financially keep up with stuff like that, that's the underlying question. But at the end of the day, I know everybody that I compete with, we love doing this sport for the fans. I said it earlier where when I did the Santa Monica Classic, I had so many people come up to me, take pictures of me, ask me to sign stuff for them and stuff like that. But I got more pleasure out of doing things like working with, or interacting with the community, interacting with the fans than I did deadlifting a car. You know what I mean? Like it's still fun, but it's when I get to entertain other people. That was like the true positive aspect of doing what I do.
Yeah. Well, remember us little people when you make it up there.
Oh, gosh.
You're already there too, though. Sheesh. Let's debunk some myths, huh?
Okay, let's do that.
Yeah. So I'll read out the myth.
Okay.
And you tell me your opinion.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the first one is it's all about brute force, no skill. You kind of talked about this already. So
yeah, that in my opinion's definitely not true. Brute force, has its benefits, right? Like you could just totally be a Hulk and just lift things. Let's say, for example, the log clean and press. You said earlier that you got to play with that a little bit. Yeah, very fun, right? But very technical. You have a weightlifting and CrossFit background. You can clean and jerk. You can snatch barbells and stuff like that. But how was your first time cleaning a log?
That was weird.
Weird, yeah. Right? So you could totally just bicep curl a log and then push it overhead. You totally could. But then you're wasting so much energy. You risk the potential of hurting yourself with something like that. And so there's a balance between having that pure raw strength, but also learning the technique. Picking up an Atlas stone. Yeah. I'm sure a lot of people off the street could just walk up and pick up a rock. But there's techniques and ways to, save energy, give yourself that competitive advantage. Because say, for example, it's usually not just one rock. You usually have to pick up a couple Atlas stones, or you have to load a max Atlas stone or something like that, right? So while brute strength has its benefits in this sport, it definitely is like a foundational, like, okay, be strong. But to a degree, like there are also techniques that you need to kind of learn. Some of the most technical events, in my opinion, in strongman are pretty much all of the overhead pressing events. Log clean and press is very technical. The circus dumbbell clean and press is very technical. There is an event where you have to clean and press a block. And then when you lock that block out overhead, you have to balance it. You have to stabilize and stuff like that. So understanding your mechanics there and how you stabilize things, utilizing your core and stuff. You can't just be strong to a certain degree.
Yeah. Number 2.
Let's do it.
Well, you already talked about this though. It's also a sport for. It's only a big sport.
It's only a sport for giants.
It's only a sport for giants.
That is, like I said earlier, entirely not true. While I would say a lot of the athletes that I compete with in competitions are usually like your 6-footers plus, your 300 plus pound guys or gals, you know, it's not always the case. I have found way more shock factor seeing some of the smaller, lighter weight athletes do some of the similar things that we do. I talked earlier about a buddy of mine who's a 181 athlete who has the same overhead press or similar overhead press as one of my PRs. You never know what's out there.
Yeah.
I have a friend who's over in the UK, Josh Lancaster, who I would consider him a giant slayer because he did the Santa Monica Classic and he was just killing it on some of these events, doing some of the same events that athletes that were way double his size struggling with. So like I said, it comes back down to leverages, understanding how your body moves, works, and stuff like that. And then also, like, having strength. But you don't need to be 400 plus pounds to do what we do.
Number 3, only genetic freaks can do strongman. It's not for normal people.
I think genetics definitely play a benefit, right? Like, if I were to pick my ideal vicious strongman, right? Like my ideal strongman size, I would have somebody who's probably 6'3", 6'4", probably about 340.
Around 340?
340
You're close,
to
though.
350.
You're all pretty close.
Yeah. Why? Because to a degree, being too tall is awkward. Your leverages or your extremities are just long. So like being like 6'9", while we talked about half Thor earlier, being 6'9" can have its benefits, can also have its detriments. Being too short can also have your pros and cons as well. Depending on how you train, how your nutrition is and stuff like that, I've seen really, actually I'll use this as a personal example. When I tell people that I'm 330, a lot of them are shocked. And I would say that's more so like the average human, like the people like that don't go to the gym and stuff like that. They've just never seen a 300-pound human before. And usually they expect me to look sloppy, essentially. I'm not going to try and sound super arrogant, but like they would expect somebody, when you say you're 300 plus pounds, I think the easiest go-to is to expect somebody who looks sloppy. But that's just not the case. At the end of the day, whether you're 400 pounds or whether you're 220 pounds, if you're in the sport, you train like an athlete. And so while I think in any realm, genetics plays a benefit, it could also be, a bad thing. If you were blessed with being 6'9", some of the events that may ask for you to be a little bit smaller might be to your benefit, might be to your disadvantage. One of the things that I can think of is like a car deadlift, for example. The taller you are and the longer you are, the harder it is to get leverage into that deadlift and be able to pull it. So it really just kind of varies. Genetics can definitely play a key role, but I really don't think it's everything. And I'm not going to be cheesy and say, hard work beats whatever the saying is. But at the end of the day, like it depends on how you train.
Yeah. Let's do one more question because people are coming in.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Strongman is just powerlifting with odd objects.
No. And as a former powerlifter, I'm going to get a lot of backlash for this, but I don't think a lot of powerlifters are athletic. Everybody is really good at being statically strong, and that is just the way the training style is. There are definitely athletes who are powerlifters that can, cross-train and stuff like that, but with the pure sport, the foundational concept of powerlifting is statically your 1 rep max. And a lot of athletes in powerlifting will train squat, bench, deadlift, and try to complement squat, bench, deadlift. I tell a lot of people who are powerlifters, when I stopped powerlifting and became a strongman, I felt 1,000 times healthier. I felt all of my aches and pains that I used to have as a powerlifter completely just went away. I used to have a lot of shoulder pain, a lot of bicep tendonitis. I used to have a lot of hip issues. And then when I stopped powerlifting and started training as a strongman, all of those aches and pains went away. And I think the reasoning behind that is when you train as a strongman, even as a CrossFitter, for example, you have so many different variables that you need to train. The way you stabilize things, the way you brace your core, the way you move and carry things. I know a lot of smaller athletes who are like less than 200 pounds who can deadlift 900 pound deadlifts, but can you pick up 800 pounds and walk with it? You see what I'm saying? Right? So I have to be able to deadlift 900 plus pounds, 1,000 pounds, whatever, but I've also had to carry 1,000 pounds on my back and walk with it. And I'm not saying that, strongman is better than powerlifting. It's just a different training style. You are training purely to be statically strong, and everything that you do outside of squat, bench, deadlift is to complement how statically strong your squat, bench, deadlift is. Versus in strongman, we have so many different events and so many different styles of events, whether it's push, pull, drag, carry, toss, we even throw things and stuff like that. There's so many different things that you have to be overall stronger. And I think because I've started training overall, it's very functional. Because I've started training more functional than I was as a powerlifter, things just stopped hurting. And I think a lot of the reasons why I had a lot of those aches and pains was they weren't from poor form or anything like that. It was from a lack of training those things, whether they're stabilizers, whether they're, those micro tendons and stuff like that. Whatever, I'm not an anatomy expert, but like those muscle groups that you're lacking, you're ignoring because you only need to do this, this, and this to complement your squat. Yep. And I know, it's one of those things too, where like, to kind of piggyback off of your question, I think powerlifting complements strongman to a degree, but you definitely don't need to be a powerlifter or have a powerlifting background to be good at strongman. I think you could get really good at strongman and cross over to powerlifting and do really well with no powerlifting background. Just because we still squat, bench, deadlift, maybe not so much deadlift, or maybe not so much bench, and maybe not so much squat, depending on your coach. But like, you're still going to get strong, right? For me, I talked earlier about my bench PR. While relatively it's still low at 440. When I went from 418 to 440, those were like a 2-year difference. And I don't bench press at all. I incline and I overhead, and I still was able to PR on a static lift like that. So I think there's a weird argument and there's a weird like controversy between, can powerlifters be strongman and be just as good, and because there was a time where John Hack, the world's greatest powerlifter currently, came over to strongman, and I think he got like 8th or something at the official strongman games. Greatest powerlifter of all time, and still got 8th, which is still relatively good. He's a phenomenal athlete. But could a let's just say a local level powerlifter go to strongman and be just as good? I think there's a lot of catch up. I think when you're an elite level athlete, you're an elite level athlete. I think there's just a little bit of a difference. And like I said, I'm not bashing the sport of powerlifting. It's one of those things. It's just a different sport. You are training purely to complement squat, bench, and deadlift, and in trying to lift statically the most amount of weight you can at that compound lift. Hey, Mark, where can we find you? You can find me on Instagram at Legend of Marc. That's Mark with a C, so Legend of Marc. You can find me on YouTube at Legend of Marc _ because apparently Legend of Marc was taken by me, and I don't even have access to that account anymore. Yeah, those are the 2 ways you can reach out to me, and I'd love to connect. If you have any questions about strongman, I'm more than happy to answer to the best of my abilities. And I will be competing at the official Strongman Games in Arlington, Texas, November 18th through the 20th. And remember that, because if I do well, I will be one of the next World's Strongest Man athletes.